This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. When tank mixed with glyphosate, Focus Herbicide provides a complete solution. Burn off and extended control on key grassy and broadleaf weeds like wild oats, bromes, and kochia in lentils, wheat, and more. See your local retailer today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 to Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. We are on location, as you've heard. We are in Saskatoon, or just outside of the city here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. We're at a beautiful resort, fantastic. There's also a casino. There's a little bit of irony in the fact that we're going to be talking about risk management and marketing plans at a casino today. There is a little bit of irony there, but looking forward to it. Today's show is brought to you by Cargill Marketsense. Make sure you go to cargillag.ca to learn more. And the show today is loaded with people from Cargill Marketsense. Really looking forward to having today's discussion. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find us across all the different social media platforms, or you are more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. If somebody in the audience calls, we'll see if my phone rings. Okay, today, as I mentioned, it's brought to you by Cargill Marketsense. We're going to be talking about a marketing plan. And of course, the markets have, well, as of late, not exactly behaved in the manner of which we would really like them to. They, in essence, they've kind of rolled over here. And it's got farmers thinking about tighter margins, less profitability, possibly even some losses in some of these crops, and just trying to figure out what 2024 looks like. We'll be joined today by Ed Broschinski. He is the lead Marketsense analyst. Michelle Gemmell is the national Marketsense leader. And Denise Gabriel is the Marketsense leader in southern Saskatchewan. So we got a great group of Cargill Marketsense people to shed some light on the markets and talk about a marketing plan here today. At this time where we asked farmers in January through our Real Agri Studies surveys, we asked them, when it comes to 2024, is it looking more risky, same, or less risky than 2023? 76% of growers said this year looks more risky than last year. Honestly, that makes a lot of sense to me, and probably a lot of you in the crowd. In fact, some people even say to me, I thought it actually would have been more. But when we ask growers, do you have a risk management plan? Only 39% of growers in Canada said that they do have a plan in place. Okay, maybe that would seem, that felt a little bit low to me, but we'll ask the audience later what they think about it. We asked people, though, as well, to what extent does having a risk management plan assist in prep for the growing season and giving you a peace of mind? Only 7% said it doesn't help at all. So we've got a little bit of a gap between we're moving into a very risky year. I know that a risk management plan does help, but only 39% say they actually have one. So we've got some work to do, and that's part of the reason that we're here today to talk on RealAg Radio with the group here. Over, I think there's like 250 growers here in the audience. As you heard, they are rowdy, they're ready to go, they're full of lunch, and they are ready to rock. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we've got Ed Broschinski. He's going to join us. We're going to talk about the current marketing environment. I got some questions for him. Hopefully he can shed some good news on which direction this market is headed next. All that and a whole lot more. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you by Cargill Marketsense. We're back right after this.
FP Genetics relentlessly brings innovative new seed genetics to Canadian farms, ensuring growers, breeders, and farmers are supported and viable. Being a valued partner on your farm for decades, you can expect the continuous pursuit of the best genetics. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's strong portfolio of wheat, durum, barley, oats, peas, and rye, or contact your local FP seed dealer or territory manager to discuss your certified seed strategy specific to your region.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Co-op AgZone Field is a digital agronomy tool designed to help optimize your operation. Through integrated layers of satellite imagery, soil maps, yield data, and more, Co-op Grow team members use AgZone Field to provide organized, timely, in-season data, allowing you to make informed management decisions quickly and effectively. Trust your Co-op Grow team to support your operation with AgZone Field. Contact your local co-op today.
Man, I love Saskatoon. This is a great location. This crowd is fantastic. Today's show is brought to you by Cargill Marketsense. And we are joined right now by Ed Broschinski. Ed, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, it's great to chat with you again. We met at the Red Deer event. We had you provide great perspectives on the markets, and you can really see that the customers really hang on to what your thoughts are on the market. And, being a market analyst, easy job when the market's like a hockey stick. These are a little bit more of troubling times. If I was to ask you to describe today's commodity market environment in one word, what word would you use?
Bearish.
Bearish. It's that simple.
That's the one word I would use.
Okay, that's fair. No, that is fair. It's the word that I have been using as well. We know, coming out of Commodity Classic, I was down in Houston, and it became very clear a couple weeks ago, there is a lot of unsold 23 corn. It's also becoming very apparent in Canada, there's a lot of unsold 23 canola. And in both cases, what I hear from farmers is, if I'm selling 23 corn or canola today, and probably some other commodities too, I'm selling it at a loss, and I'm not going to do that. I feel like there's a lot of people very much trapped right now in that kind of decision making. Is that fair, or?
Yeah, I agree with you that there's a lot of feeling like it's a loss. I think one of the challenges is actually determining whether or not it is. When you can use last year's production numbers, last year's costs, and that will give you a different view potentially than forecasting next year's costs, right? Yeah. Next year's yields and that sort of thing. So there always is a bit of a risk premium, right? You want to have a bit of a buffer on the new crop because you don't know what the yield's going to be. You don't know what that result's going to be. So it might feel today like those prices aren't profitable.
Right. I call it holder's regret. And I sympathize with farmers because what we have seen in some of our sentiment index data is farmers' confidence in their marketing has been declining as the market moves lower, which makes sense. But their outlook on which direction the market is headed is bouncing all over the place. It's been a real challenge to kind of sort this out. And because we're coming off of, say, 3 years where any kind of news seemed to just sort of lift the market higher. We had some people out there that were saying new normal. I always say if anybody says new normal, you kick them in the butt because they've just jinxed everything and ruined it. Mm-hmm. Earlier this week, we had the acreage reports or the estimates from Statistics Canada. Take any issue with some of their forecasts or thoughts they have on some of the given crops?
I don't really take any issue with that. Actually, the estimates were more or less in line with expectations. I think the important thing to remember is that survey was done in December. And so, the price environment has changed since then. There's probably some different acreage intentions today. And the other thing is, too, is that even from today until seeding, those acreage intentions will probably change yet again. So the only issue would be just that there's so much time still to make a decision that almost certainly we'll see some changes in the numbers.
And I think as much as we talk about, hey, changes to your rotation this year, and we are, oats definitely big time up, chickpeas definitely up, lentils were up, field peas were up, wheat down, canola down. As much as we talk about some of those movements, we don't have a lot of fluctuation in acres as much as, say, maybe the Midwest, where I'm, going to move more of my corn acre into beans and vice versa, depending on the acres can shift a lot more. That doesn't happen as much here, I think.
It doesn't happen as much with kind of the big crops, right? Like wheat and canola, you see smaller nominal changes, but there is, significant changes, like you said, in oats, right? And we have seen in the past where we've seen a major swing into lentils about 10 years ago, and especially, too, into different varieties within that lentil, right? Green lentils, probably going to see a big acreage increase. Green peas is another one, right?
If you can get seed.
If you can get seed, yeah.
Yep.
You bet, yeah.
And I think the other cap on the pulse acre, and this is, again, you're the analyst, I'm just reading tea leaves, is Phytomyces and root rot being, I think that's kind of a cap as well, that shortage of potential seed out there for people to really increase the acre based on the market, what the market's telling them to do. The one that I wondered about, though, Ed, is the canola acre. I still think it's going to be lower than, I think it was down 3.5% to 21 million and change. I think we're going to have a 20 in front of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that definitely the sentiment since the survey was done in December, I'll be honest with you, I was surprised to see the acreage actually come down as much as it did in the December report.
Interesting.
And then now, probably the sentiment has declined even more about wanting to put that canola acre in. Now, of course, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the canola market rally by $1.50 a bushel. So what if that were to continue? Would we see then more acres come back into canola? I don't know. I think it's relative, right, to where's wheat at that day, where's barley at, that sort of thing too.
I was speaking at an event in where was I last? Camrose was one of the places I was last week, and it's been a traveling roadshow as of late. But I was in Camrose, and I had a grower come up to me and sort of ask the question, what gets us out of this current bearish environment like you just mentioned? Mm-hmm. Is it weather being terrible somewhere, like we have a terrible crop in the Midwest, or a terrible South America crop, or Ukraine and Russia can't harvest wheat, or whatever? Or is it demand has to lead us out of this? What's your thought?
It's a combination of both. When you go into a stock building phase like this, it's in response to high prices, right? Low stocks in previous years. So now we're going to push probably, to the other extreme, where we build stocks, overabundant stocks, burdensome stocks. We push prices perhaps even lower than the cost of production, right? To take acres out of production, to take production down. And then, of course, those lower prices incentivize demand. So we'll see demand start to come in. That's a normal reaction. These cycles, though, of reduced production in response to low prices and increased demand in response to low prices, those are multi-year cycles, because the crop year, once you put that grain in the ground, it's going to be with you for the next 12 months, maybe longer. So these cycles take longer to play out sometimes than I think we would hope. But eventually, we're looking at probably a 2-year, 3-year cycle here to get back out of this, what we're in right now.
2-3 months or 2-3 years? 2-3 years.
2-3 years.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Okay. Boo, Ed. Everybody boo, Ed.
No, I want to couch that, though. Getting out of this to a new bull market, that's probably the timeline that you're after, right? Getting into a more stable market that we can reliably kind of look and forecast, that's a little bit less time than.
Okay, that's okay. Gotcha. I like the damage control you're doing. I'm getting Ed in trouble, everybody. Okay, now I like to sort of try to figure out, okay, what's noise and what are the signals? Separating that. Is corn the one that we watch to lead us out of this, or is that putting the whole thing too simplistic?
Yeah, corn is king would be the line of thinking there. For cereal grains, I think that's definitely one that we need to watch. It's the most it's got the most abundant supplies right now globally. But I think you could have the corn market and the oilseed market be very different, and you could see them diverge. The prices diverge. So I don't think that you would look to corn to predict the price of canola today. That's not what I would do.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So obviously for canola, then we're looking at the whole veg oil complex.
You bet. Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at definitely soybeans then.
Soybeans, vegetable oil demand, energies. Energy is now a very big component of vegetable oil pricing.
Right.
Also corn too, through ethanol, but energies are something that we're watching a lot closer than we did maybe 5 years ago. Right, and the whole idea here is, I know I think they were talking about renewable diesel and stuff earlier here today, and we focused on that when we were doing the show in Red Deer. That's a big part of the demand diversification equation that the potentially for the market going forward component. We're probably. So I would say we've seen that demand catch, right? We saw it catch probably last year when the United States doubled the imports of canola oil as that was allowed into the biofuel pathway or the biofuel supply chain. So we did see that demand catch, but it's like a grinding starter. It catches sometimes, right? And then it backs off and grinds, and then it catches again, right? And then finally that engine starts running. And that's probably, I think, a lot of the crush capacity here in Canada coming online in 25. So we're still about a year away from that really, like I said, catching on and being steady. Well, we're going to talk for the rest of the show about building that marketing plan, what it looks like, what are the considerations, because everybody has different risk tolerances and cash flow requirements. Not all plans are the same, but we can talk about the variables in general. Are you still, when we saw each other in Red Deer, you're talking about, I think, defend the castle. Is that how you put it? We're still saying that? Yeah, still defend the castle. I think that there's wealth that's been created in Canada through high land values, high commodity prices, and so there's this kind of good foundation of wealth in Canada that's been created. We want to defend that now. Okay. Markets naturally want to give and take away, right? We're in the takeaway phase, so we want to defend against the market taking that wealth away. We're going to take a quick break. Ed's going to stay up here. We're going to have two more join us, and we're going to talk about the marketing plans, steering through this bearish market as Ed has described. You're listening to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. During the commercial breaks, we have so much fun with the audience. Okay, we are back here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM, brought to you today by Cargill Marketsense. Now, we still got Ed Broschinski up here. We've already met him. Now we're going to introduce you to our two other panelists here. We got Michelle Gemmell. Michelle, how's it going?
Really good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so what do you do at Cargill Marketsense?
So I lead the Marketsense program. I've been doing this job for about 5 years, and then prior to that, worked as an advisor and advisory leader within the regions.
Nice. Well, welcome to the show. And also joining us is Denise Gabriel. Denise, nice to meet you.
Thanks, Shaun. Nice to meet you as well.
Okay, what do you do at Cargill?
So I am in a role where I'm a player coach. I work with the advisory clients in southern Saskatchewan, but I also lead a team of 6 that are doing the same within the province.
Okay, so I don't know who we want to start with, jump in here, but I guess first of all we should, learning from, what's his name, Seth Godin. He's got the book of the why, right? I think we should start with the why. Why do I need to actually have a marketing plan? Who wants to jump in on that one first? Why do I need one?
Sure, I can start with that. So we've been looking at this probably about the last 2 decades within Cargill. And what we've been seeing, which is really interesting, is the farmers that are succeeding, the ones that are, there's just that tiny bit of an edge, are the ones that have put deliberate time into cultivating a marketing plan. And they may have reached out for help with that. A lot of times we'll get asked, surely you must work with the farmer that's really struggling. And yes, we do want to help. But the ones that we see that really, really just take that next step up are the ones that have a plan. So I think it's very important. It's treating your farm as a business, knowing that it's also part of your life. So it's what we've seen over the last 2 decades, Shaun.
Ed, do you think the current marketing environment drives this more, or is it a situation when the market like we were in where it was kind of like the hockey stick pattern? It could be easy to think, well, I don't really need a plan because marketing is a lot easier in that sort of environment, or should you just have one all the time, period?
So the last thing first, yes, I think you should always have a plan, period, because even in the good years, you want to maximize those good years to make sure that you're building wealth to offset the bad years, right? But what I do see in my time as an advisor and as an analyst is that the demand for creating marketing plans increases when margins get tighter.
Yep.
And that makes sense because you need to have a way to manage that risk, especially if you're looking at negative margins, right?
Yeah.
So definitely a lot more farmers asking about cost of production, asking about forward-looking outlooks, asking about 2-3 year forecasts during this kind of type of market right now. Yeah.
Think about your household, right? When your household income is tight, that's where we start to think, we need a family budget. What are these kids spending on skip the dishes? We have those kinds of conversations in the house. At least I do. I don't know about you guys. And so it's kind of fighting complacency a little bit during the good times as well, right, Ed?
Yeah. I mean, what we see is that even though you can get away with it and you can build a lot of bad habits through those good times, right? And then so sometimes it takes a while to come back to those marketing plans that are so crucial. But yes, it's easy to get complacent when times are good. So
Denise, I guess let's hit on what does it actually look like? So when you're talking to customers, because this is I think one of the barriers. Okay, it's sort of like do you have a strategic plan? Yeah, it's in my head, or it's written on a napkin, or maybe it's 50 pages I typed up on a Word document. Everybody's going to have a different one, but what does it actually look like?
Yeah, that is a great question. And even amongst ourselves as advisors, we debate a little bit about what should be in that plan. I always go back to kind of 4 key components when I'm thinking about my client base. So for the first really is understanding the liabilities of the farm and the cash flow needs, because we need to know when we need the money. We don't want to get backed into a corner where we have to make an inopportune sale just because we need that cash in the bank account next week. We really want to be able to take advantage of those opportunities well in advance when we see them hit the market options that are in front of us. So cash flow, really essential for me to understand. The second piece for me is being really realistic about the production on the farm. So thinking about their yield potential for the crop that's coming. And it's easy to fall into recency bias and think, 2021, that was a bad year on the farm. I got overextended. I had to pay off some contract cancellations and be really fearful of that, right? So coming into these crop years, coming out of that situation, being really realistic about what is the potential of this crop, because lots of times when we're working towards our goals, it's actually a percentage that we're working towards. We want to be 20% sold, 40% sold, and as you're changing your yields, that's, shifting you ahead or behind where you actually want to sit. So the other piece of that, though, is it's not wrong to change it as we go, right? Things might be looking great in May, and we start pulling them back in July, and being able to make those changes and keep everybody in the loop. Third piece that really matters to me in my marketing plan is the cost of production. We got to get down to the true break-evens on each crop, because that's going to allow us to assess the profitability of the prices that we can lock in for the farm. And that's going to help us make some decisions. Like, is it crop A or crop B that we should be selling right now? Because we may be moving profitability, just capturing break even, or considering selling something to loss. And how do we make that choice? If we're just looking at prices, it's very emotional, right? So we need to ground that emotion in a number that we can actually compare. Fourth piece I always consider is the client's risk profile. And that's really around risk tolerance, risk capacity, risk appetite. But for me, those other pieces I've talked about, that cash flow need, the realistic yield, the cost of production or break even, those are the what are we going to sell, how much are we going to sell, when are we going to sell it questions. But understanding somebody's risk profile is really about how are we going to sell. So when you work with Cargill, for example, there's about 10 different ways you can sell your grain. You don't just need to take a flat price or look at just futures or just basis. There's other ways to maneuver through that market that manage production risk or leave you exposed for upside if the market is to rally. I'm going to ask Ed, though. He has a great analogy for how he talks about risk.
Yeah. So a lot of times we talk about risk tolerance, and it's kind of a general term that we throw around. What's your risk tolerance, right? And we give some sort of generic answer. Well, I like to put it in terms of cheesecake.
As one should.
Cheesecake. There's a lot of risk with cheesecake. But I have the appetite to eat 8 cheesecakes. That's my appetite. Love them so much.
Wow.
I would love to eat 8, right? That might be like a farm that wants to take all of this year's crop, next year's crop, and the crop after that and time it for the top, right? High
Bet
risk
on black.
appetite. Now, my capacity to eat those cheesecakes is maybe 2. I could probably physically fit 2 cheesecakes in my belly. That's my capacity, right? So the farm might want to hold 3 crops, but there may be constraints that they can only hold, a certain amount of grain. That's their capacity for risk. And then within that, there's your tolerance. The reality is I probably can only tolerate 1 or 2 pieces of cheesecake. Otherwise, I'll start to feel sick. And you might start to feel sick too, even with a small amount of grain, if the price is very volatile. And so your tolerance, your capacity, and your appetite are different parts of the risk profile that we have to identify what we're talking about. Because we're talking about appetite, it's very different than talking about tolerance.
Yeah. Well, I just tried to eat my weight in Nanaimo bars, and I understand this metaphor very, very well. Go ahead.
Thanks, Shaun. So thanks, Denise, for going through that so thoroughly. I did want to comment on the yield piece. So it was really interesting today. Earlier today, Ed showed a picture of the drought map in Canada on July 31. It was all red, pretty much all red. And then he showed you what happened afterwards. So I do really challenge you all that are listening and here in the audience, try and be very objective about your yield estimates and don't be afraid to change them, as Denise said. So what we see, and I was kind of reminiscing with the team, I would travel across Canada last year. I saw plants. I saw the stand was established in many, 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 many fields. So the plant was there. Sure, it was dry, but the plant was there. So I think we have to challenge ourselves. Like, you're not doing yourself a favor by scaling it way back, especially when prices are good. And then you find out later you had extra crop. So try and think differently around your yield. You might have one answer for StatsCan, but you need to have a real true answer for yourself.
Yep, 100% of the farm is going into flax, StatsCan. There is somebody out here. I know it. We'll find them before supper. Okay, this is great. Great start to the conversation. We got to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a lot more about the idea of a marketing plan, including some of the topics we've already discussed inside of it. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Does your N stabilizer contain an active ingredient load high enough to be agronomically effective? If not, it could be costing you time and money. If you're putting down a nitrogen stabilizer, put your trust in Koch Agronomic Services. Solutions like Super U, Tribune, and Anvil. Each delivers high active ingredient concentrations that low-rate products just can't match. Compare how imitator products stack up to agronomically effective solutions at defendyourn.ca.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or Download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Cargill Marketsense. We are in the Dakota Dunes Resort here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And we're talking about building a marketing plan with Cargill Marketsense. We are joined here on the panel by Ed Broschinski, Michelle Gemmell, and Denise Gabriel. And Ed, one of the added complexities of having a marketing plan right now in the middle of March of 24 is there is still some 23 crop to be marketed. And I'm assuming it's a little bit more than typical in an average year. How does the fact that we have carryover crop from last year factor into trying to do a 24 marketing plan at the same time? Do we have to finish the 23 before we do 24, or what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It looks a little bit different on every farm and sometimes between different crops, right? If you can manage the risk on next year's crop using different kind of marketing tools, options that allow you to put a floor price in but keep the upside open, that sort of thing, manage the production risk with tools, then you can be more aggressive on new crop without even having sold all of your old crop. It's possible to do that and manage your risk. Whereas if you got something like, I'll give durum for an example, where the production risk is a little bit higher, there's no tools to manage that risk, you may be doing something like, you might find yourself thinking, well, I can sell 80% of my old crop, I can sell then therefore up to 20% of my new crop, and that's 100% net across 2 crop years, and that's a reasonable position to be in, maybe for your farm, right? So that's some ways that you can spread that risk across multiple crop years.
Well, and there's crops like durum. I always think about canary seed, where people are used to sort of stockpiling and waiting for the big jump. So it depends which crop it is, like you said.
Yeah, durum's an easy one because we see a lot of that hedging of new crop sales, keeping some in the bin to try to make sure that you've got it to actually make that contract. Right. I've seen that frequently. So
okay, so Michelle, what's the difference between a risk management plan and a marketing plan, or are they really the same thing?
That's a really good question. I think they are, or they should be, the same thing. They don't often get referred to as the same thing. So we'll often hear, one of the questions that our advisors might ask a farmer as they're getting to know them is, talk to me about how you marketed your grain last year. What was your plan? What was your marketing plan? And that marketing plan may or may not have had elements of risk management in it. So to have a really strong and robust marketing plan, you absolutely need to marry the two up. You have to have the risk management. And I know at times farmers will push back a little on, you're always preaching risk management. We've been doing this for years. You're always talking about risk management. What about opportunity realization? What about enhancement? Risk management is both. You also need to capture more on the upside because you know that if we're in a sustained bull market, that everything else is going to go up around you. So when we talk risk management, it's both upside and protecting the down. So I think once people start to understand that, they realize how important the both need to come together.
Okay. So you were going to say something? Okay, cool. Okay. Now, going back, Denise, you gave the I think it was 5 components, right? Now, okay. So I had said that I believe this is a barrier, in terms of so you gave the components of what you need to consider. But what does it actually look like? Is this something that does it need to be written down? Because I think people's vision of the complexity at hand here is one of the barriers. It's just easier not to actually do it.
Yeah, so how you write it down can really vary. I tend to ground myself in a piece of software we use called the Farm Maximizer, which is
I'm more loose sheets of paper all over the place.
And how does anybody else ever find those sheets and hold you accountable to them?
Yeah.
That's the tricky part, right? When we keep it in our head or we keep it in a document that only we see, like just myself for my own goals, you need to be sharing them with people and talking about them, and that's how you're going to get held accountable to making them live. So
and who's holding you accountable? Is that you holding yourself accountable?
So if you're working with somebody on your grain marketing plan and your risk management plan, right, it could be your spouse, but it could be a professional that you've paid. But having that conversation regularly, a lot of what our clients actually are signing us to do with them is create discipline, right? We're going to talk about a goal, and then we're going to talk about how we execute on that goal, and we're going to revisit that execution process at regular intervals, whether that's every 4 weeks, 2 months, whatever it needs to be for that farm.
So, okay, but Michelle, you had said earlier about, okay, you need to be realistic in terms of how your yields change and updating your yields. So I used to think I was getting 30 bushels of canola, and now I think it rained, we're going to get 50 or we're going to get 60 or whatever. Our marketing plan can change too throughout the year. Talk about the importance of that, or like, because the market goes up 50 cents, it's like, I was going to sell, I'm not going to sell anymore, right?
Yes, and that one's a little complex because you often need to have your overarching goals. And I'm thinking way back in time to MLM. Somebody was trying to introduce us to an MLM service, a multi-level marketing.
Oh, okay.
And the idea of a dream board was really, really key. So if you took pictures of where you want to be in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years, what you wanted to have, and you put it on a board, that's the thing that kept you grounded, that kept you focused. Now, in between that, all the tactics to get there are going to shift and change, and there's opportunities in the markets. So I think when we think through our marketing plan, we need to understand that overarching goal, and it's been mentioned a few times, is it 5 years from now that I want to retire? I've worked with a farmer who said, I really just want to have that $1 million net in my pocket. Whatever that goal is, you are going to absolutely change your plan, but you shouldn't change your goal. And then when you're looking at changing your plan, your tactics within your plan, you have to think about where does emotion play in. And that's why it's so important to have another objective person, whether it's your spouse, somebody, a friend, somebody you trust in your circle, or you've hired someone to keep you on track. Because once you're in the grips of emotion, it's very difficult to stay the course. And I know Ed's really passionate about how execution plays in. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is the biggest one. I mean, wasn't it Mike Tyson that said everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face? And I feel like I've been repeatedly punched in the face for the last 12 months or so by the market. And a lot of plans have changed because of what's happened in the market. Executing a plan when you are busy on the cedar or harvesting or you're at the lake is different than executing a plan when you're in a steady state of mind at the office, right? And being able to execute in a variety of different environments is absolutely critical, especially in this environment where you're seeing very brief opportunities that disappear very quickly. Having the presence of mind to execute is of utmost importance. And if you don't have the plan, and if you haven't built scenarios ahead of time, you're going to be executing on the fly, and that's hard.
Okay, so I get I need to have the goal, what I'm trying to get to, but I could imagine private jet, but it's really not realistic. That seems kind of way too far out. So I guess, how do I really make sense of the profitability goals, right? So that, how do I make sense of that so it actually connects to what my potential grain and oilseed marketing looks like? Do you know what I mean? Because it's well, of course, my profitability goals, I want to make as much money as I can. Is that what you're talking about, or is it more granular than that?
I can chime in a bit, Shaun, on this one, Ed, if you're still thinking. I think that the reality is that you're producing a physical commodity that does at some point need to be moved. And so you have this window of time that you want to make the best of this opportunity. And some of those windows can be really large. In 2008, I saw 7-year canola come up the driveway. It was very, very dry. But when you look at the opportunity, the window of marketing for most farmers mostly is to move this crop within the year from when it's been growing. Most farmers operate that way. So you have to have a plan to accomplish that. And that's smaller, Shaun, than the private jet, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you break it down to that is, how do I do the best I can? You really need to dig into your emotions at this point is how, and these are cliche, but how am I going to sleep well at night throughout this year when I have to move this crop? How am I going to feel like I don't regret every decision I made along the way? So there's a lot of emotional pieces that you need to lay to rest. And those are the questions I know when we work with folks that we try and ask. and try and understand. And there are strategies and there are tools that can oftentimes assuage those emotions, but you need to be willing to talk about it. And I think that's more of the small.
Okay. So once I establish what my profitability goals are, my return, what return I am comfortable with, and part of that is knowing your costs in order to do that calculation, which I think is also a piece of this that is kind of missing sometimes, Denise. Is that fair?
Yeah, sometimes we find that the numbers are in people's heads or they're kind of jotted out on a napkin, but actually sitting down and putting the pencil to paper and asking some questions about, okay, when you're looking at, for example, if you're using your financial statements, what your accountant is trying to accomplish is a little different than actually grounding the cost of growing this crop and how we want to have profit goals. So having the numbers to look through, but then really taking a thought process to them and saying, what's going to change on my farm if I forward project instead of looking in the rearview mirror with those financials? And how do I plan for what I'm going to do to make sure that's successful?
Okay. Well, I have some questions about figuring out my risk tolerance, but we'll do that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Like we're at a Riders game. Welcome back to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio. Riders, you wouldn't be cheering that loud at the Riders game because they haven't been that good. But okay, we are back here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, brought to you today by Cargill Marketsense, and we're talking about marketing plans. And so we've talked about goals, putting profitability and a return objective in place, revenue and expenses being a part of that. There's another component here. My risk tolerance. I need to figure out my risk tolerance to know how real that return goal is. I can go to the casino and say I'm going to, triple or 10 times my money. I'm not sure I have the risk profile to be willing to suffer the losses in order to get that return. So how do I decide, Ed, what my risk tolerance is?
It's not one decision. And usually it's, as cliche as it sounds, a journey.
That just sounds like I'm going to lose a lot of money.
and that's part of it, Shaun. It's actually part of it, and it's also how you react to making lots of money, right? And having somebody to talk through that process of how you reacted when you lost money, how you thought you were going to react, what you thought your risk tolerance was, what you thought your capacity was, to when that actually happens, that event actually occurs, and you lose money. Then how did you feel? And identifying, wow, okay, this is what I actually felt like versus I thought that I could handle, a canola volatility, $5 a bushel up and down. I thought going into the market that was okay, but then the market dropped 50 cents and I was scared, right? That's how you start to realize that's my limit, is actually 50 cents rather than $5. But it usually takes some time to go through those experiences because, look, I mean, we might go to the casino today and lie to ourselves about our risk tolerance at the roulette table. A lot of us will do that.
I love roulette. That is the best game.
It's easy to lie to ourselves. It really is easy to lie to ourselves about risk tolerance, and sometimes we have to go through experiences and identify those experiences in order to truly know what our risk tolerance is.
So I grew up in southern Alberta in a feed yard, and I can identify with how you just put that because we had a seed bit when we were farming. I had a seed business and we had a feed yard. And I identified really early, and when I came back from university, that I did not have the risk profile or tolerance to be a cattle feeder. It requires a real iron, steel gut, however you want to put that, because you're always buying in a negative position and hoping that the market comes up and comes your way. And because if you always wanted to just buy your feeder animals and your corn and your barley and it to be a profit and be guaranteed, you're not in the right business. I think, in order to be a feeder of hogs, that you've got there's something you're different. Your risk profile, and it's different than if you're, say, just growing canola and wheat in Saskatchewan. If you're feeding hogs, the market volatility would drive most people totally sick to their stomach. Okay, it's a different kind of risk mindset inside of our own industry. So I think you got to find it for yourself, and you may learn some tough lessons in the process, Michelle.
Yes, I was just reflecting as you were talking, because I do think grain farmers also have iron stomachs.
Yeah.
Because they put a crop in every single year. They have the ultimate risk that they embrace and they come back and do it again. So I do think they have some sort of an iron stomach too.
Yeah.
What is interesting is oftentimes a spouse will notice more about a person or a friend or a relative. And sometimes when we're on a farm, one of them will come up to us after and say, she or he really gets sick when the markets fall. But the person won't necessarily always say that out loud. So I think there's even people around you that you could ask and say, how would you classify my risk tolerance, capacity, appetite? How do you think I view risk? So we do an exercise within our own group, within our own advisors, because we're constantly trying to help them keep their bias checked, because they will have a natural bias too. Yeah. So we do have an exercise where you can actually go through and classify your risk. So it's something we can always share with farmers too.
Okay, cool. I think it's an important part of the whole equation, right? Okay, so a couple other things before we get into scenario building, because we've got to make sure we hit on that, is interest rates and cost of carry. How does that factor into the building of the marketing plan?
Yeah, I can take that one. Definitely has become more important in the last year, as interest rates have really climbed in the environment we're sitting in. Taking that money and thinking about what would you do with it if it was in your bank account instead of in your grain bin, and then how do you assess what that money would do for you? So is it paying down a loan at 10% interest? Is it going into something like a GIC, really safe? For a while we could get those at 5% interest, but making some of those decisions on what the money could do for you if it was working for you, and that'll help you decide if it's time to move that grain sooner rather than later.
Okay, go ahead.
There's also an element of benchmarking that has changed with the rising interest rates, such that now the risk-free rate is right around 4 to 5%. And so that actually changes the economics of your farm operation, such that, capital invested in growing the farm has to compete with a risk-free rate of 4 to 5%. Does that dollar spent on the farm compete with that risk-free rate? Is a question that we didn't really have to consider when interest rates were closer to zero. So that's changed the calculus, so to speak.
Yeah, and you talk about things changing. You look at December and what people were expecting from what would happen with the interest rates with the Fed in the U.S. and the Bank of Canada. There were people thinking that we would see 6 interest rate cuts in the U.S. here in 2024, and there's more data. The inflation data of the U.S. this morning was higher than what people thought. A lot of people are now saying maybe 2, 3 at the most. So talk about plans changing. There's a good one, a good example. In a very short period of time, 3 months. Okay, scenario building. We got to talk about that. Why is that important, and what do you mean when you say that?
Scenario building, kind of for my line of work, right, comes to what kind of different catalysts could happen in the market that are conceivable that could change the market price, essentially, right, or the supply and demand dynamics. And it's really important to build scenarios like that from an analyst desk, because then you have an idea of what the market should do, And whether or not it's higher or lower than expectations is always the question, right? USDA report, everybody wants to know what the market expects. So if the number is higher or lower, the market reacts. So that's really important from an analyst desk, is building scenarios like that to create expectations and baselines. For a farm, it's also very important, because what would happen on my farm if canola went back to 20? Right? How would that change?
I'm going to buy a much nicer boat.
What would it take for that to happen? What different catalysts would have to occur for that to happen? And if they did occur, what would I do? Right? That scenario is very different than what if canola went to $9? Right? What catalysts would occur? How would my marketing plan change then? And maybe you got one or two other ones too, so let's say 4 scenarios.
Yeah.
Then you've got a fairly good benchmark for when the market kind of, when time goes on and you see some of those catalysts start to occur, you say, okay, execute marketing plan A, B, C, or D, right? Those, of course, change as data comes in. But if you don't have those scenarios built, then your mind's worrying, right? Because you don't know what's happening next, what could happen next. It's so much uncertainty. That word
emotion is creeping in.
Yes, emotion creeps in. If you got scenarios built, you said, oh yeah, I planned for this already.
So, I'm so smart. Part of this, though, too, is sort of like your former self writing promises to your future self a little bit, where, okay, and this is where the writing it down kind of comes to be, is like, okay, I told myself if canola moves up $1 a bushel, I was going to do this. Instead of it, and it can change, but it's sort of reminding yourself, instead of it being, nope, we're going up $2. Right? I had a farmer last week that we were in Camrose. He told me he had 100% of his 23 canola still unsold. And I think he had told me he was going to 15 or 16. I can't remember what he exactly said, but he was waiting for it, and he was sure it was going. And he may be right. High risk profile, way higher than mine. But I think that's the purpose of the writing it down, is also to remind yourself in these scenarios, here's when I was unemotional, here's what I said I was going to do, and more importantly, why I was going to do it, which gets to that broader goal as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I was reflecting as you were talking in the operational space, because I worked in operations in a grain elevator as well. And we talked often about like the ERPs, emergency response plans. And one of the things we just went from that and said, what if we had a shelf of solutions? Because you're in a crisis moment, can you pull down the binder that says, here's how we handle this? And I think with the scenario building, it's the same thing. So we used to sit with farmers, and sometimes we'd have our software up on their big screen TV, and the husband, the wife, the kids, and we're eating popcorn and we're building things. And one might say, what if the price of commodities falls by 20%? What if I get it flooded out on these 4 quarters? What if, and we would just spend time building that when we were in a rational, unemotional state of mind. And then when it came, it wasn't exactly that what happened. It wasn't exactly bang on. They didn't drop 20%, but they dropped 16. And you're like, okay, so let's pull down the 20% scenario. You're still okay. You can still farm another day. Here's where crop insurance is going to kick in. Here's what we decided to do to protect the risk on these crops. Here's the changes we decided to make. Here's the plan we built last February when we were all comfortable and just having a good state of mind.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I really, really want to thank Ed, Michelle, Denise. Thanks a lot for being with us here today, and thanks for having RealAg Radio at your Cargill Marketsense event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaun.
Okay, if you have any feedback on today's show, some great information here today, because honestly, this market, as Ed describes, it's bearish, but if there's some volatility, it does bring opportunity. So a marketing plan is a big component of knowing what you're going to do and when, if stuff happens. So if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find us across all the different social media platforms, or you can also call the RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Thank you, Saskatoon. And we'll be back next week.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. Lentil and wheat growers get a clean start this spring with Focus Herbicide. Along with early burn-off and extended weed control, Focus Herbicide provides excellent resistance management. See your local retailer today.